Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Fred and WRI, who put me in this spot, and I'm sure I will enjoy this session. And we've been discussing about this for many years, and well, since the moratorium was announced. But certainly we follow the story of the moratorium, and that's why I was trying to put together the development, the debate, by giving this kind of title, The Fate of the Indonesian. In fact, it's not Indonesia Moratorium, but Indonesian Forest Moratorium. And I try with Sonia, who's been working with me from the beginning, very beginning, when we were thinking about this INPRES, the presidential instruction, because she's very knowledgeable on this spatial information. So I put ICRAF logo there in purpose, which is quite strange to have this template with ICRAF logo. But Sonia has been very instrumental to help me. And again, the way I look at it is about what's going to happen. So picking up from what Pak Koni said in the last slide, is it going to be continued? Well, it's only last week it was on the media that the lawmakers, the parliaments, want to stop it, although the ministry tried to push it to continue. Well, this is the political economy, or not only political, but political economy of moratorium. Try to put it forward because they said it's depriving local livelihood, job opportunities decline, etc., etc. They even, quote unquote, threaten the possibility of freezing the reforestation budget at that level. So it is at stake, and it's only last week, very fresh. So with that in mind, I'm trying to organize my talk by looking at positively or optimistically about the possibility of using the existing regulation, which should not be conflicting, but should be synergized to push this together so that the second objective of the moratorium, which is, I think, is the main one, is not been very much achieved, which is to govern the forest itself. So how to do that, and how it can be more meaningful if it is going to be extended at all. So that's the premise I'm trying to put together. What if we have not only thinking beyond the canopy, thinking out of the box? The CIFOR tagline. So last year we did an analysis at the onset of the announcement of that instruction. And I consulted a lot with lawyers, including Mas Ota is here today, and trying to understand what's the difference between INPRES, the presidential instruction, with PERPRES, presidential regulation, and other levels of regulatory frameworks. He bluntly said that, well, if it is an instruction, it has to be obeyed, but if they don't obey, there is no legal implication. That's in short, if I put it right. Of course, the instruction was, if you read it line by line, there are many controversies. At least from the technical point of view, from the academic point of view, we put in the analysis about the ill-defined. The term primary and natural is mixed together. It's been used interchangeably without, having a real sense what is meant by what is it called? Suspending the permits for primary forests. There is no such definition legally about primary forest, and also secondary is no such definition. But in the legal document, many of the term used is natural forest, hutan alam. So there's one of the controversy that we noted in the first place, and certainly if the instruction use primary, then there should be secondary. And what's going to happen with the secondary? Certainly it is excluded. So if it is categorized as secondary, it has no place for this impress. I put our DG at that time at stake. She was very engaged in this conversation and willing to be one of the co-author. And we carefully craft the analysis. It went through the Ministry of Forestry to not get censorship, but certainly check what we try to say about this. It is quite, what do you call it, no surprise kind of policy. If we say something about Indonesia, then the official who is hosting us should know what we are trying to say. And it went through the process, and it took quite some time. But certainly we had a lot of queries there in this analysis. But the second line there is, it is a stepping stone to a better forest governance, which is about what is my conversation today is all about. Is it really governed now? Or if it is not, what's going to be, what should be the governance on primary forest and peatland? Again, in that analysis, we queries about the size of the area. And at that time, it was quite controversial, I should say. A number of government agencies say many different numbers about the area which was under the moratorium. But when we try to put together, again, with this legal kind of instrument to define what is primary, what is secondary, what is peat, in fact, the size of the real, genuinely under the new regulation is not as much as 71 million hectares. It was only 22.5, which is represented by, do we have pointers?
No, I'm sorry.
Only this part with this legend. This is the one genuinely under the moratorium, and the rest already protected by law. Again, legally speaking, it's much higher than impress. So then raise another question. If it is under moratorium, in fact, it is already protected by law, does it mean that issuing permits in areas which are protected by law possible, or was made possible? So a lot of questions with this simple Venn diagram if you're talking about area. But the story does go beyond area, that's which I'm going to talk later. Not only area, which is important. So as it was stated in the instruction in the document, that the map of moratorium, known as PIPIB, IMM, will be revised 6 monthly. And you can see here the change from first revision, second revision, and third revision. There are two things I want to underline here. From what Mas Ota presented yesterday, the first announcement was 71, but I read this report. I intentionally just cut and paste. It was not 71, but 69, whatever it was. But the message here is that every time it is revised, the size is shrinking, meaning that there are some, discrepancies, and the legal status was not clear, and then it's put together as area which are not protected. In short, again, area does not really matter. The area of peatland, which was originally 11 million, quite close to our estimate, was reduced almost half, meaning that 5 million is excluded, no longer protected under the moratorium, meaning that license has already been issued for this area. And again, 5 million is peanut compared with 120-something million hectares, but in terms of carbon, it's very meaningful. I'll talk about that later. Again, it's keep on decreasing, and the last revision about 2 weeks ago says that it is sinking again of about 500,000. So now the area which is under the moratorium, including those which are protected by law, is less than 65 million hectares. So let's see what's happened with the peatland, which is part of the main issue here, why peatland is protected. And the figures used so far in the discussion is the FAO report, peat CO2 report, which says that it's about 20 to 22 million hectares of peatland. And as I said, it's half of it on the moratorium, and it's decreased another half. So it's only 5 million now. And it is very challenging how to really have a real attention and devise a proper legal framework to protect the remaining peatland in the phase of new license being permit or issued, and also the area which are undergoing degradation, because degradation in peatland, which is going to be reported, if it is going to be an RED mechanism, we have to have the MRV in place. And we know very little about peatland, because we need to really understand what's the process taking place on the ground. We have to develop the emission factor and also activity data as far as the IPCC guideline is concerned. So we need to quantify what's the change over time. In the early 2000, the change was about 100,000 hectares per year only on peatland. And it's keep on changing, and we do not have a good grasp about the change of area, and also the process of draining, burning, etc., which has to be part of the equation when we are talking about MRV. So it's a huge challenge if we include peatland in terms of cost to measure, report, and verify. If it is extended at all, what's going to happen with the secondary forest? Well, I try to put this in a kind of graphical term. If we have the term forest, then underneath the forest is soil, and the soil itself can be categorized in general by mineral and organic or peat soil, which contain a lot of organic carbon. Then this term primary against or versus secondary, natural against plantation, where are we working at? I categorize them in terms of legal definition and identification. The solid line indicates legally defined and identifiable, and the dotted line is legally not defined, or I'm not saying illegally defined, but not defined, but identifiable. This is it. We can differentiate natural and primary from the physical appearance, and at least the natural forest has been defined, but primary forest is not. If you go further to look at the place or the ecosystem they grow, we can differentiate the primary and secondary forest in, primary and natural forest in organic and peat soil. Likewise, for natural forest, if we go to use the legal definition of natural forest. But it's hard to see natural secondary. It's not defined legally. And secondary in mineral soil, secondary in peatland, we can see it. It's identifiable, but it's not legally defined. In fact, secondary forest is 40 million hectares. 47, sorry. And that's a lot of land to think about carbon. And some of them are in a good condition. They call it a log over, and still contain a lot of carbon and biodiversity. And if it is going to be under RED mechanism, still viable, eligible, because one can improve or enhance the carbon stock in this kind of ecosystem. Oops. Then again, if it is extended, mangrove can be included. This is a new game, at least from my point of view. When we look at the area of mangrove, it's very small, 3 million, maybe less. but it's a quarter of the globe mangrove area. Indonesia hosts so much mangrove, and again, the deforestation rate is amazing. It's 50, in the last 50 years, the rate is about 2 to 3%, much higher than primary forest. And again, it is very interesting to look at, although it's not very interesting to work in this kind of place. And it's very smelly and sting and muddy and a lot of mosquito for sure. The area of mangrove is, as I said, maybe less than 3 million. Distributed, we've studied in Papua, Kalimantan, and Sumatra. Is a lot of mangrove in a very good condition. Some of them already exploited, some of them in a secondary stage, if secondary is considered as disturbed. But the storage of carbon is incredible. If we look at the ecosystem-based kind of approach, the pool of carbon in this particular ecosystem does not differ from riverine and estuary. It's basically more than 1,000 tons per hectare. Most of them are stored below the ground, which is difficult to assess, and mainly it's in Sumatra and in Papua, followed by Papua, and in Kalimantan. And if you look at the distribution of carbon, very little above the ground. It's less than 200 tons per hectare, but most of them are below the ground. And to compare with pristine tropical upland forests growing in mineral soil, the amount of carbon in mangrove and peatland are huge. So as I said, it's not the area that matters, but the carbon density. So if we manage to conserve relatively small area of mangrove and peatland, it's much more meaningful than embracing large size of secondary or primary forests with very uncertain governance system. So if it is going to be extended, the moratorium governance issue should look at peatland and mangrove more seriously with regard to carbon as well as livelihood, adaptation of climate change, etc. So it's a lot of things offered by this particular ecosystem. Quickly. Again, although it's been deforested, although it's been cleared and continually cleared, regularly cleared, peatland still store huge amount of carbon. It's keep on emitting, regardless it is forest or not. And certainly controlling water table, controlling fire is important. So possibilities is, even if it's not red, it could be NAMAS, which is being discussed in the negotiation table right now, how NAMAS is going to flash out. Same thing for oil palm. It is expanding very rapidly, and Indonesia is very aggressive in issuing permits, and those which are no longer categorized as forest land is going to be converted, some 40 million hectares or so. Now, the next thing, again, I do not want to pretend to be a lawyer here, but looking at from the lay person perspective, it's very strange to have, the date of this new presidential regulation and the IMPRES we are talking about is just side by side. 2011. This is a new initiative issued almost the same time as the IMPRES moratorium. And this is the so-called MP3EI, the acceleration of economic development, which means that there will be a sixth corridor in Indonesia to develop the economy, and certainly it will involve a lot of land use change, infrastructure development. And certainly what we are talking about, peatland, mangrove, primary forests will be very much affected. And the last threshold, the last stronghold of peat and mangrove with the Papua is not is not spared. The activity there will be the center of food production, fishery, energy, and mining. And in the INPRESS, it is not excluded. I mean, it is not regulated. It receives a red carpet for food production. So the INPRESS really provide the access to develop places which are possibly going to potentially to develop the economy. 26/7, the 7 might lie on this particular area. So this is not a kind of either or. The choice is so difficult, then one has to optimize through the existing regulation how this thing can be dealt with. Again, it's only last week. Soon after that parliamentarian statement, the Ministry of Agriculture issued a figure about the cancelled permits and the implication on the oil palm expansion. So less companies are interested, and the expansion is halved, and the production, the increase of the production decreased, but it still remains high. Instead of having a new 9,000 ton fresh fruit per hour, it's only half of it was implemented last year. So it is affecting the production. And as I said, it was the statement from the parliamentarian. So they are the place where this regulatory framework will be approved, and certainly one has to engage them quite well. And this is another presidential instruction which is quite recent. The title here is basically to amend the existing regulation. So the previous regulation was amended with the first one, and the next one, which is again side by side, number 60 and number 61, is only 2 months ago. Basically is to rearrange the forest land function. And if, again, the moratorium is going to be extended, is there a possibility of swapping? Again, this cross-agency, cross-departmental collaboration is really needed to realign the existing law on the spatial planning. If it is possible, then what I was saying about high carbon density, forest-rich carbon can be regained in terms of reducing or aiming to reduce the emission or emission reduction target. The second law is related to the utilization of forest land. There are some clauses which are related to the unimplemented permits, the lousy implementation that can be revoked. So if that is possible, again, peatland or primary forests which are not managed well can be recaptured. This is our homework, I think. So I have 3 points to say here with this picture taken by my colleague when I was sitting on the boat in Papua. These people are very wealthy, I should say. It's a very peaceful place to live. A lot of food. You just do that and you get fish. You know, just going into the coast, you have rice, and very peaceful. But they are very much vulnerable, very much threatened by the sea level rise, etc., etc. So working in the coastal area, the mangrove is very, very interesting if we are trying to attack or mitigate climate change as well as to adapt with it. So the broad objective of moratorium, which is to properly govern forests, should be further pursued to provide an enabling condition for better forest management. So if it is going to be extended, as I said, the target should be carbon-rich forests, including secondary forest, which is still in good condition. When we say secondary, it's much, much better than the desert here. To put that into perspective, it's still very green if you fly over it, and it's still growing much higher than primary, which is reaching the saturation. And if it is enhanced, it's even better growth, with a growth of something like 30 ton per hectare per year. So that's quite something. And engaging lawmakers is crucial to synergize existing regulation. And again, if really the aim is 26% or more than that, regaining carbon-rich ecosystem is very crucial. With that, I want to end my talk. Thank you.